Hi, welcome to another episode of Wikipedia Weekly. I'm your host, Andrew Lee, also known as user Fuzzheado. Welcome to one of our special episodes where we're going to be editing live. So you might be seeing us on any number of platforms out there, but we're going to bring in our guests here. We are proud to bring in Rebecca O'Neill from Wikimedia Ireland. We also have Jan Ainali from Switzerland.
Sweden!
Sorry, Sweden! And Richard Nipel from New York City. Oh, those SW countries are really hard. So we are doing something we had in mind a while back, which is, just watching and working with Wikimedians and seeing how they edit. And one of the cool things is that I just ran into Rebecca on Twitter when she said, I think I'm just going to Twitch some of my editing. And we said, well, no, just don't do Twitch. Let's do this whole thing with Facebook, Twitter, and everything else. So if you're watching us right now, we are using a tool called StreamYard, which is kind of the best of what it does right now. So you might be seeing us on Facebook, you might be seeing us on YouTube, or you might be seeing us on Periscope and also Twitch. So the ones that you're probably going to see us most on are YouTube and Twitter, but we also have a Facebook group called Wikipedia Weekly, and we also have Twitch for those folks who are into gaming. So before we get too far into things, I would love for Rebecca to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about the activities that she does with Wikimedia Ireland. So Rebecca, tell us more about what you're up to.
So I'm the project coordinator for Wikimedia Community Ireland. So we're the user group for ostensibly the island of Ireland, but we collaborate with Wikimedia UK for activities in Northern Ireland. So, I mean, personally, I've been an editor for, I think it's 9 years and 5 months counting, something like that. But who's counting? And primarily I write about Irish topics, and that can be incredibly broad. So people from Ireland, but people who also worked in Ireland or had some kind of influence on Irish history or culture. I specifically write mostly about women, so an awful lot of women in red. But in my day job, I suppose it's like an awful lot of people who are employed by various Wikimedia groups. I work with groups of students, librarians, people who work in museums, aiming to get more Irish content openly licensed so it can be put onto Wikimedia Commons, or get people editing Wikipedia articles that are relevant to Irish culture. So it's kind of broadly. And that increasingly is more and more focused on Wikipede, which is the Irish language Wikipedia.
Neat. And tell us a little bit about what percentages or the balance of what languages you work with, and in Ireland, what kinds of efforts you're trying to put forth in terms of not just English Wikipedia, but other things.
So being, now, you always have to put the caveat of, so all Irish people learn Irish. We learn Irish from age 4 to 18. It's mandatory. But nearly all of us are dreadful at it. For one reason or another. The mantra that most Irish people is, it's the way it's taught. It's very bad. And most people are either afraid of it or kind of had bad experiences with it, the usual thing of kind of not feeling fluent and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of slow and steady, working with Irish language groups, people who are perhaps trying to put forward a kind of a view of Irish that isn't so scholarly, that's more kind of conducting your life through a language rather than this kind of very worthy patriotic thing that Irish has kind of been held up as over the years. So again, it's the usual thing of school groups, but people who advocate for the use of Irish in their daily lives, the ability to conduct their lives through Irish, and also technologists who are really interested in developing Wikipede. So then you have a large corpus of open licensed Irish material that then can be fed into language translation machines and things like that. So there's kind of there's a few facets. When it comes to people who live their lives through Irish, it's probably roughly only about 1% of the population of Ireland, so it's quite low. But we're hoping that Wikipede can become more of a feature within their lives, and also people who perhaps have more of a, I suppose that they're not immersed in the language all of the time. They have a more casual relationship with Irish, but they want to be able to keep up a little bit of their written Irish.
Right, and that's something that I think a bunch of different countries have something similar to what you described, is that the government is trying to be the vanguard of a culture and a language and trying to make sure there's a certain amount of literacy. But as you said, it's fighting against a lot of momentum of popular culture. Right?
Definitely. And there's kind of a resurgence in the last few years. There's quite a few groups, and it's very much kind of trying to wrest Irish away from this, as I said, this really scholarly, kind of people who are kind of feel very wrapped up in grammar and things like that. We're all kind of collectively traumatized by the conditional future and where a H turns up and where it doesn't turn up. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is that you're trying to speak or write in Irish, and that really, if you miss out a preposition or a subjunctive or something like that, it's not the end of the world so long as somebody understands what you're saying. So it's trying to wrest it from the Puritans that people would see them as a little bit.
Right. So we're looking at the front page right now, right? This is what we would typically see. What are some of the things from Gaelic Wikipedia here that you can tell us that's interesting or unique or special about what you would see here?
So there are some very odd little elements. So generally, and as you would imagine, an awful lot of Irish history is very well represented. That was some of the first content that was written about. So, the island of saints and scholars, standing stones and dolmens and all that kind of stuff was written about. But Simpsons are incredibly well covered on Wikipedia because there was one really inspired editor who wrote an awful lot about Simpsons. So there's an info box developed specifically for the Simpsons. But I also know there is a retired science teacher, so an awful lot of that on the right-hand side of your screen where you're saying Oliac Mathematica agus Nadorha, that's science, mathematics, and nature. And he writes an awful lot about science topics. So, and specifically kind of cutting edge stuff. So he will be in contact with the department in the government called Terma, who developed new terminology in the Irish language for emerging scientific topics.
Neat.
So he's very much trying to write about current things as opposed to purely historical items.
Nice. Now, you're also involved with a conference in our community called Celtic Knot, right? So tell us a little bit about that, because it's not just Celtic, right? There's a lot of other stuff in there.
Yes, it's an interesting one. So it's Wikimedia UK launched it, I'm going to get the year wrong, 2018, I think, 2017. She says unsure of herself. And it came out of the back of the first Wikimedian residence in Scots Gaelic. And so it was a collaboration between the University of Edinburgh and the National Library of Scotland. And the idea was that Scots Gaelic Wikipedia, it's basically Wikipede but spelt with a U, so it's Wikipede. And they said, okay, we're a really small language Wikipedia. We need to talk to other small language Wikipedias to see what they're doing and whether we can learn from them. So it was a one-day conference the first time it happened, and then it went to Wales, it went to Cornwall last year, and it was supposed to be physically in Ireland this year, but now it's going to be virtually in Ireland this year. And the idea is that, so it started off with the idea of kind of Celtic languages, so Welsh, Breton, the Gaelic languages, but also Northern Sami was always in there as well, and Catalan, Basque, that kind of thing. But specifically last year, we had a few editors who were interested in kind of talking about languages. I mean, Northern Sami would be one of them, where there isn't a formalized orthography, like a written form of it, and how much of an issue that is. So that's a pressing issue for an awful lot of African languages. There isn't a accepted written form of them. So how then do you have a written encyclopedia in that language? So we're finding that while we call it the Celtic Knot, it is just kind of I suppose it speaks more of where the conversation started as opposed to the kinds of languages that are discussed during it.
Great. Well, thanks so much for explaining that, because it's great seeing this from afar, how much activity there has been. And I've watched the conference from online before, so it's great. And what are the plans now for putting online? It's a little bit challenging, right? How to do that.
So it's going to be a massive learning curve, to say the least. And we think it's going to be, so traditionally it would have been over 2 days, and kind of part of that would be a little bit of an unconference. So the beauty of Celtic Knot was that you would have people who were working within a local language. So in this case, people who are engaged in Irish language and technologies. And then you would have people who are, say, experienced Wikidaticians or something like that would then be kind of parachuted in, and you could, one can learn from the other. So we want to emulate that. So that might be a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous events, I suppose the kind of labs that we've run, the kind of help desk type ones. So if somebody's interested in Wiki Data, that they don't necessarily have to sit in for an entire seminar over 2 or 3 hours. If they have a specific question, they can post it. So it's quite kind of fluid at the moment, but we're hoping that it'd be quite a dynamic set of events.
Nice. Well, let's not delay any further. I want to hear about what you're editing. So when you first tweeted about doing this, you're definitely interested in a specific task. And just to reiterate for folks out there, we are on multiple platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube, we are also on Twitch. And this is kind of a more free-form, unique episode of the Wikipedia Weekly podcast, where it's just we love learning from each other while we're editing. So we thought it'd be great to see what Rebecca is editing in terms of de-stubbifying. So even that term is kind of unknown to anyone outside of our community. So de-stubbing, Beatrice Gubbins. Oh, that's our show title. That's got to be our show title. So tell us a little bit about the tasks you typically do. Women in Red is a great project that a lot of people might have heard of, trying to bring better balance of gender bios of women and men and other folks in Wikipedia. But what is de-stubbing, and how does that play a role in the things that you do with Women in Red?
So de-stubbing, a stub on Wikipedia is an article that's really short. So it's typically 2 to 3, maybe 5 lines. It's a paragraph. You might have a citation, or it mightn't even be an inline citation. It might just give you kind of a bibliographic entry. So it's almost, I suppose, to an awful lot of Wikipedians, kind of a placeholdery type article. It's not giving you a huge amount about the topic. So a certain amount of what I do, and especially when I'm working with student groups, because creating an article from scratch on Wikipedia is quite a tall ask of new editors. So I collect stubs and I create lists of them to use as fodder basically for student groups an awful lot of the time, because I'm like, if the article already exists, they can't do too much damage when it comes to it. And I was working on this article a little bit earlier. You mentioned the Twitch stream, so I was working on it a small bit earlier with a brand new account to kind of show people what the editing experience is like. So we can kind of compare. So I added sections. So I started kind of filling out the sections a little bit. She was just kind of a paragraph. There's also some language in the article which isn't what we would refer to as neutral point of view, or particularly encyclopedic. You can see the last sentence there is a little bit kind of florid, I suppose is the word we might use, a little bit flowery. So what I'm going to do is I have quite a good source for this article, which is the Dictionary of Irish Biography. It's kind of the companion to, say, the American National Biography, the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, or the Australian one. It's written by the Royal Irish Academy. It's compiled by them, written by various historians who are tasked with writing up biographies on people. So it's kind of the go-to, and Beatrice has an entry in it, so I can use that to fill out an awful lot of the details that are missing from this at the moment.
Nice. So yeah, why don't you go ahead and edit, and people kind of see how you edit. When the funny thing is that, and you can keep on editing while I do the sports casting play-by-play. I don't know what it is, but it's basically no two people edit the same way in Wikipedia, which is just fascinating. That even with like 10-year veterans, you'll sometimes like, what is that? How did you do that? And what's so great about it is that we're always kind of learning different tricks from each other and different techniques. So you're a visual editor user, which is nice. There's a whole bunch of folks there are very prolific that don't ever use the visual editor, which blows my mind. But that's something that's interesting to me. And then Richard, go ahead. Sorry.
So you're just going to see that I'm incredibly slow.
No.
Primarily what you're going to see.
No, but I was just going to say, again, don't let me bother you when you're doing this, is that this weird thing with the visual editor is good, but it's still not perfect. And for a lot of folks, just seeing that gigantic space at the top is like, oh my God, I did something wrong. It's like, no, you didn't. It just, visual editor doesn't work perfect yet. So people might hit the delete key and think I've messed up this article. So there's still little interesting quirks about our system, even for veterans who see this.
Yeah,
and I guess here it's probably the info box that's making problems.
Right. That's a good point. Once you do templates, which visual editor just like, I'll do my best, but you're really pushing it with me. Right. we're just lucky to even render. I mean, remember visual editor in the early days didn't do well with anything that was a template, right? So at least we're seeing the info box in something that looks like it's reality, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and everything has to be back compatible with 10 years of random wiki code by thousands of people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so for folks just tuning in, we are editing with Rebecca O'Neill of Wikimedia Ireland. You might be watching us on multiple platforms. And also, if you are on any of those platforms, believe it or not, if you comment back to us on YouTube, on Facebook, or on Twitter, we will see your comments here and we can actually surface those and put them on screen. So feel free to ask questions, feel free to comment, feel free to bring up anything. If you're a Wikipedia editor, or if you're not a Wikipedia editor, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. This is very free form. It's almost like an office hours or a jam session where we will be happy to receive any of your questions and answer them while we look at articles. So this is an editing session. Richard Dipel has been a trainer out of New York City for many years. Jan Ainali from Sweden is is experienced in you know, our whole movement that's happened in Europe, and we are more than happy to answer any questions there. And what you're seeing here is live editing Wikipedia using the visual editor, and Rebecca here is de-stubbifying, which is basically taking an article that's pretty short and incomplete and trying to fill it out. And while you're doing that, I'm going to read the Beatrice McGubbins article to find out more about Beatrice McGubbins.
I noticed something interesting about this article, which is the photo. The photo is a passport photo from, I guess the Republic of Ireland, and it's copyrighted, and it's from not sure exactly. It's not actually sure if it says the exact date, but it's a little bit unusual to see a passport photo used under fair use. And I'm sure there's a better version of this photo somewhere, but it was uploaded by user Women Artist Updates, who I'm sure worked on a lot of articles. But there has to be, I mean, at least this passport has to exist somewhere, and it was probably there's a version at least without all the stamps on it,
right?
At the very least.
Well, I mean, Richard, that's a great commentary. This is something that most people don't see behind the scenes. Is that most people will see the article. Most people will see the article and then they will kind of take it at face value saying, oh, well, I see this article and I see this image. But behind the scenes, if you're on English Wikipedia, many of these images that you see are actually not free. They don't exist on what we call Wikimedia Commons, which is where the actual free images are. So as Richard said, if you click on this, you will see there is a big message saying this is non-free. And English Wikipedia does have some exceptions that you can actually put a non-free image that would not normally, which just wouldn't fit into Wikimedia Commons, is not distributable in a free way. But using the fair use doctrine, we will say, well, we need it here. And even though it's copyrighted, we will use it only in this way. So, Richard, there are certain guidelines as to whether you can use an image in this manner that limits its spread or its impact. Do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, so it depends. So this is a photograph of her. So it's a subject photograph. It's not a photograph of her artwork, which would be a whole different discussion. So I mean, I guess part of it is that obviously she's no longer alive, and there is no possibility of having a free image. Although I'm not sure that's true because she did live a fairly long time ago. And I'm not sure about the copyright law in Ireland, but she died in 1944. And I'm not sure when she did most of her work. She was born in 1878, so she probably did some of her work at a time when she was famous and the stuff is public domain, but I'm not sure. And that'd be something to look into. There don't seem to be a lot of pictures of her. Go ahead.
Yeah, even if she died in 1944, the photographer of this image might have lived much longer.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on I don't know the Irish copyright law. Rebecca probably knows better. But sometimes if it's before a certain date, then it's public domain anyway. I noticed there are no pictures of her artwork, which obviously makes sense, because she's an artist. There should be some. I don't see a lot of photos of her online, but anywhere.
The copyright law in Ireland is pretty much the same as the UK. So it's 70 years after the death of the creator. And with unknown works, it's kind of broadly 70 years. So we're going back, 1950 now. So things fell into the public domain the first of this year. It is an interesting photograph. Gubbins died pre the establishment of the Republic of Ireland, so she wouldn't have lived to have seen the Republic. That wasn't founded until 1949. So she would have been living at this time during the Free State from 1922 onwards. So it would still, and that's broadly why Irish copyright law is pretty much the same as the UK, because we just copied the statute books. So there's a parallel there. So she would have technically, I was looking at her Wikidata item earlier. So what's quite nice on Wikidata, we could look at that a little bit, is there are different ways of denoting Irishness. So being a citizen of Ireland from 1801 to 1921 or to 1922, there isn't a Wikidata item for being a citizen of the Free State, probably because it was so short-lived. You probably fell into one or the other. I think I had both there, which is probably incorrect. The second one is probably incorrect because she was dead before that appeared.
Right, and for folks new to Wikidata, it's interesting. You're probably saying, "Well, that's a repeated statement there." It's like, nope. If you put your pointer on top, that I don't know if it's going to show up on the screen there. That's a Q27. And this one is Q57695350. It's not showing up on the screen there, but I'm reading it off my screen. So they're actually two different entities, right?
Yeah.
Or two different items.
And
so
Q27 is a prime number, so congratulations for that.
What? What? It's not. Is it? 27.
I'm sorry. I meant to say it's a desirable real estate. It's a prime location rather than a prime number, which would be a whole other level, which I did not quite reach. But thank you for interpreting that way.
Okay, great. I'm like, you just rocked my world, Richard. Like 27's prime, newly discovered. Right. So this is a different Ireland, but both of them are statements in the Ireland Wikidata item there. Interesting. I'm going to give it back to Rebecca there so we can see what she's doing. So this is, if you saw at the bottom of the editing where Rebecca was just editing, there's a little puzzle piece that said authority control. And that's actually something that is a template that will bring in all the Wikidata identifiers that it might find there. So some of you may or may not know that if you look at the article about Beatrice Gubbins, I don't know if anything is coming in right now. I guess there's nothing coming in right now. But if I show you the article, I'm going to take it away for a second there. At the bottom, there might be identifiers for her records in bibliographic databases or library databases, and that might show up at the bottom there. That's what the authority control part does.
So how do you like the authority control template? We're having a bit of a discussion on Swedish Wikipedia on how much to add on it.
Right. Interesting.
What do we want to show up? Which external identifiers should qualify? And stuff like that. And because if we take an example with some of the famous persons, they can have hundreds of external identifiers, and you can have a very rich box with links. So how has the discussion been on English Wikipedia?
Richard, you may know more than I do, but it's not without controversy, I would say. I think there's a certain faction, at least in English Wikipedia, that doesn't like this alphabet soup at the bottom of it's that's impressive, but what am I going to do with that, right? I don't know. Probably, we could show you one that's, like Barack Obama was going to have just a gigantic one at the bottom, right? But you're right in that I think we've been able to hit a balance of having the identifiers, but a limited set. But to my knowledge, I think it's global, right, Richard? It's not like you can say, oh, if it's an author, we want these. If it's a politician, we want these. I think it's just one setting for any bio, and I think that's why it's a little bit crude in that it would use VIAF and Library of Congress, these very big identifiers. But I was just looking at this one for Beatrice. You probably want to have this one, right? Dictionary of Irish Biography. That's a really important one for this topic, but it may not have made the cut because it's not generally useful on a big template level, right? Richard, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's There must be a way to do it, though. I mean, it would be really complicated, but you can probably, surface, say, this is an Irish biography. Let's service, the Irish National Dictionary, whatever. That might be interesting.
Yeah, so it's not impossible. So we did some testing, and like you could say, if there's less than 5, show them all. And if they're bigger, then you can go to a prioritized list or something like that.
Right. Dude, this is Barack Obama's, which is kind of big right there.
Yeah. But you could also think about, like, if you click one of these, what do you end up in? Because some of these are like raw database stuff and not very user-friendly, whereas others are something that you would like to read, and it's more like a further reading section almost.
Right. I think that is a great point. Is like it's so varied in terms of what you get. Right. Like you could get a very bare database entry like that, or you could get a really rich descriptive page. Right. So I don't know what the answer is.
No, I think here we're still like, these are widely used already, but we're only scratching the top of the possibilities of the potential with Wikidata and connections to other databases.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, ideally, if you look at, let me show you what is pretty well known. If you look at some of the major ones, I think it's VF. If you look at this one, it tries to give you some kind of graphical view, like, well, I got to scroll down. Well, maybe it doesn't. Yeah, like this. Like it tries to give you some graphical view of connectivity. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I'm not showing that to you. Let me get that to you. I'm tab crazy here. So if I show you this, it'll show you this graphical view like that, right? Like potentially we could do something like that at the bottom of a Wikipedia article. I'm saying this is kind of crazy, but in terms of something more useful than just a list of things,
So this is which databases are linking back to other databases?
Yeah, it's kind of like a connection.
Yeah, nice.
Like that. Yeah.
It looks great. I'm not sure what it signifies.
I would like that in the as a thing in the Wikidata query visualizations.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Any Wikidata crew hearing this? So
Please,
I don't need to write a fabricator ticket.
Yeah, unfortunately, our propensity for innovation at the bottom of articles is not very high. It's just like, if it's text, we'll accept it. If you do anything more than that, you're going to have to really fight for something innovative, unfortunately. Yeah. So how are things going, Rebecca, on your de-stubbifying?
Slow and steady, as is always the way with me. I am an awful one for just as I'm editing, I'll kind of copy and paste from the source that I'm going from and then reword it. It looks probably quite shocking to some people, though, to just see me dump in text and then mangle it into my own words. Because I have the DIB entry kind of downloaded as a PDF, so I'm just kind of taking facts from it that are missing.
Right.
There is a certain amount of, depending on who the writer is in the DIB, some of the writers have a little bit more of a propensity to editorialize a little bit. This woman isn't that bad, but I've kind of hit a seam of, oddly enough, writing about a lot of nuns, which was an area of Wikipedia that I didn't really see myself editing a huge amount. But I suppose, hey, you can take the girl out of the Catholic Church. You can't take the Catholic Church out of the girl, it turns out. So, and some of my aunts or my great aunts would be quite happy to know that I was dedicating my time to writing about these women. And if you're talking about if you're going back historically into the 1700s and 1800s, an awful lot of the detail is lost. So there's an awful lot of supposition about saying, well, a woman typically at this time would have done X, that kind of thing. Right. So there's a certain amount of saying whether or not that has a place. This one is a lot more straightforward, obviously being that bit more recent in relative terms. Right.
And it looks like the method you typically will work with is spending a lot of time in making one edit or one save rather than a bunch of little saves that some other folks might do.
Yeah. And funnily enough, generally when I'm teaching people, I will tell them to save little and often. I don't know whether that speaks to how little faith I have in people's Wi-Fi connections,
right,
or the damage that I think they can wrought. I know that there are different schools of thought on that. I know some people, very much like kind of saving, as if we're using like an ancient form of Word that isn't auto-saving for you anymore. But it always, when I see changes to an article that, and there's no such thing as my article on Wikipedia, I'm going to say that,
right.
but maybe one that you've created or have done an awful lot of work on, you see a string of 10 edits in a row, it kind of makes my heart sink a little bit, because I might accidentally roll back one and then I can't do anything about the rest of the 9, and I'm like, oh no, I just go back and manually change what they've done.
Right.
So I tend to kind of do it in one. It depends. I mean, with something like this, I'll probably kind of finish her early life and then save it, and then maybe work on her painting career a little bit more.
Right.
I did this yesterday with Nellie Mulcahy as well. The spelling of that might be a bit challenging for for non-Irish people. There's a fada in there. Don't know if you want to take a look at that. I de-stubbed that one yesterday. Probably actually
cool.
bring it up as a like. I don't know if it's actually a double L or it might be a double L.
The double, yeah.
So again, this was one that a few years ago I had set students the task of improving, and they had they couldn't make any headway. The content that they kept adding was very very descriptive and kind of promotional.
Mm-hmm.
In tone. So she had remained a stub for a really long time, despite the fact that she's a relatively recent death, so there was quite a lot of obituaries about her, and there was quite a few kind of big exhibitions about her as well. And the Aer Lingus, she was one of the designers of one of the kind of the best known air hostess outfits in the 1960s. So she was quite well known for that, but for some reason just nobody could make edits stick to it. There was a lot of people interested in editing it, but I was seeing edits roll back an awful lot. So I finally sat down and managed to make a difference on that.
Interesting. Yeah, and are you a big fan of leaving lots of red links to prod folks, or are you are a little bit more? I don't want to say conservative, but you choose selectively how many red links to put in your page.
I try to be judicious. I can lose the run of myself sometimes, especially if it's a lot of women. Damn it. These need to exist. And I have had them changed back on me more than once. Right. So those are hills that I'm generally not willing to die on. If somebody removes a red link on me, I'm like, do you know what? I'm going to move on.
Yeah, I mean, on this call, there's a lot of veterans. I mean, I think that culture has changed quite a bit, right? In the early days of Wikipedia, it was like, yeah, red links are good. They're prodding you to do work. And now it's like quality. No, red links mean bad stuff. And people remove it just because they think it indicates missing, incomplete, bad stuff. But then how are we going to get people to edit and fill in stuff? Right?
Yeah, stop pretending it's not a wiki. Like, that's like the goal. Like, some editors, that's their entire goal, is to pretend it's not a wiki. That the reader should have no idea that it's a wiki. And they should just think they're reading Britannica. And
or that wiki mode was 10 years ago. Now it's quality mode, right? So. And also just a reminder for folks on Facebook, if you are commenting on Facebook, if you go to streamyard.com/Facebook, you can give StreamYard permission to show your face and your name, and that helps a lot more. Right now, we're going to see like Facebook user, which is fine. If you want to stay anonymous, that's also okay. But if you want to have a name associated with it, go to streamyard.com/Facebook, and then we will be able to see the face and your username there. So while Rebecca's continuing to fix some things there on the Beatrice article, we're going to show a comment here, which is related to what we're talking about before in terms of how do you train folks. So one of the comments here, sorry, I'm going to cover up two of you real quick. I've been active for 5 years now on Wiki, but I'm new in the game of teaching others how to edit. I just want to know what to look out for, even as I start to train others how to edit Wikipedia. This year I was hosting Art and Feminism Zambia. We'd only one session before it was shut down because of Corona. Yeah, so many art and feminism, events were lined up right before most things were shut down. I want to know what I should look out for and maybe some pointers on how to teach. So maybe Rebecca, do you have any favorite hints or techniques that you think are good for first timers? You've done so much of that training.
Oh God, it really depends on the group that you have. Because I've worked with kind of 16-year-olds plus, and anybody who has done a master's level or higher has no problem. Like, it just makes sense. They're like, oh yeah, I put in a piece of information, I had a citation, that's obvious. Why are you telling me this? And they generally have used some kind of citation software if they've gone to college in the last 2 years. So they are used to cite as you write, it's just natural. Whereas obviously if you're talking about kind of people who are even kind of first, say in Ireland, university students tend to go to college for about 4 years. It's only really in their 4th year that an awful lot of them are doing that kind of academic writing. So they will struggle up to that point.
Right.
And you really are teaching them how to actually, what a reference is sometimes, especially with people who are pre-college, pre-university. So I kind of start with that. It's an awful lot of kind of information literacy. It's, where do you find information? What do we gauge as good sources? And the importance of the verifiability. And it's kind of, I see it as kind of, it's critical digital skills as opposed to just wiki editing. It's where, assessing where you're getting your information from and why that's really important, that you're getting it from the Irish Times and not the Irish Sun, which is a really local reference. I'm sorry about that. I discovered earlier, I didn't realize the Irish Sun was one of the blacklisted references. I used it and went, oh, whoops. I was editing a really important article on crisp sandwiches, and finding the Irish Times writing about that was more of a challenge than I expected. It turns out that the culinary activity of placing potato chips between 2 slices of bread doesn't get a lot of airtime in journals. Who knew? There's a little bit of a push and pull and an awful lot of quote unquote Irish cuisine articles as to whether or not they're Irish or British, and which kind of gets the headline content. But yeah, it's an awful lot of kind of, I kind of think about it a little bit more as critical digital skills, so information literacy, how to find the information you're looking for well, so that you're not just finding, kind of people posting stuff randomly on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and then really focusing on the citations, and just, for everything that they put in. That's aside from all ideas around kind of red links and women in red and the gender gap and all of the things that you can kind of bombard people with. This kind of, I try to kind of just hone in, especially if it's a virtual event, because you can't have the kind of incidental conversations that you'd have kind of exploring an awful lot of that kind of nuance that you'd have in kind of an in-person event.
Yeah, I think that's great. You're right. It really does. You need to kind of customize it for the audience you have, the skill level, what kind of the expected outcomes there are. And I think the more you do the training, the more you kind of realize that the capacity to hold a lot of ideas is very limited. So you have to be very selective in which ones make it through. But I think you had a great point about just learning. We always thought this would be a good seminar to have, but it sounds kind of silly. It's like how to read Wikipedia, like just how to appreciate what you're reading in front of you before teaching how to edit, because most people don't even really know all the bells and whistles about consuming it in the first place. Right?
Yeah, I have a standard little exercise I used to do when I teach newbies, and especially if there's the very first time they do it, then I like to prepare a list of articles that I have found that has some spelling error in them. And then I assign each participant one of these spelling errors in a different article and have them go around and correct that. So that will be their first edit. So they don't have this notion that I need to write something from scratch. I can just go in and they make this tiny little edit and they get over the hump of pressing the edit button and then the save that button. And it doesn't become that scary after that. Right, but it is a lot of work, like finding 20 spelling errors that gonna remain until the day that you actually have the. So it's a intensive thing, but it has. I have had a lot of good experience of that exercise.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's one of the toughest things about training, Richard, too, is that you can't reuse your exercises, right? Because it's like once you fix them, they're fixed, and now you got to find new errors.
That's terrible. Wikipedia's getting better all the time.
Yeah. So we do need like more of a Potemkin village of stuff that people can play around with first. And some folks do that. So like WikiHow, for example, has a new user training where they have them fix mistakes on a canned exercise first. So that may not be a bad issue.
We have the sandbox, and we have some nice what are these guided tours.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like doing it live and seeing it, that's something magical about that as well. Right.
That's right. You need that aha factor. Right?
Yeah, it's out there, and I did this.
Yeah, you need to use live ammunition, not just dummies, right? You want that thrill factor. We had another question, which might be interesting. Well, Rebecca is adding more stuff there because we looked at Wikidata for a second. When creating a Wikidata item, is there a pattern to follow? Interesting question. I don't know about patterns, but there's some things we like to see more than others. Jan, you want to explain a little bit? I'll bring up one of the Nelly one here, and you can explain like what do we like to see in any Wikidata item.
Yeah, so first thing we want is actually a label on it. Like, well, I think we really need that, so you can't really create it without it. So you need a label and a description that is brief, that tells something what is this. And if you can provide it in more than one language, that's really helpful, because that's going to speed up the translation into further languages. But then, of course, the meat of it is the statements. Mm-hmm. And we don't have a very good pattern for adding that, but we do have some help. So if you start a fresh item, it will suggest that you start with instance of or subclass of. Mm-hmm. So there's some sort of backend system that, depending on what previous statements you added, it will give you suggestions on the next ones to add. Right. So if you start saying that the first is an instance of a human, then it will suggest sex or gender for the next, and so on. Right. So you do get some help from the basic interface, but there's something brewing right now, and I don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's Shex or something like that, which is sort of a system of modeling a topic. So with that, you can check, have I added the right things? And then there are a bunch of different gadgets and user scripts that can help you as well. I think one of the more famous one is the WEF, which gives you actually a bit of a form with all the things that you possibly would like to add on this topic. Mm-hmm. And if you're new to Wikidata, I really recommend you to find those and try those out, because that will help you a lot. And after you gotten used to it, you just go along, because the autocomplete is also quite good.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm always criticizing Wikipedia about is, or not just Wikipedia, but most of our wiki projects, we have a very generic vanilla interface, and then we expect people to kind of take it almost like tofu and put flavors on top of it. So it's like the base thing is really plain, and it kind of does the job. But if you really want to be productive, you have to turn on gadgets or turn on user scripts and add these little bells and whistles. So one that I was just, that if you didn't notice, this is not standard right here, what I'm pointing at. And as Jan said, that wouldn't it be nice if someone suggested, like, for a human, you should probably show these things. So you can. So what you can do here is with this tool called Recoin, which you can turn on. I believe it's in the preferences and gadgets. I think it's in there. If you turn that on, look at what happens. You click on this and says, you know what? Most of the time when you have a human, you want the given name and you want the educated at and all this stuff. So this is kind of nice in that this is I want to say kind of a very basic way of suggesting desired properties based on what other items in Wikidata have. So this is called Recoin, which I guess it means what? Completeness indicator? I don't know what the re part is.
Yeah, like, I don't know.
Relative. I think it's relative completeness indicator or something like that.
That's good.
Yeah, it's a cool name, Recoin. And then another tool which might be useful. Well, let me show you Sheck. So Jan talked about checks, which is great. This is a standard. So the great thing about Wikidata is you don't need a schema. The bad thing about Wikidata is there's no schema. So what structure do you have for a human? So the cool thing is that checks is a new standard that they're working on and has been implemented in a bunch of places that gives some shape to the expressions. That's why it's called shape expressions, a shape to the data. So it's basically saying, you know, whether you go by the tofu metaphor or the clay metaphor, you know, Wikidata items are just whatever you want it to be, but the shape expressions give it some structure, saying that, okay, I want to model a tree, I want to model a human, I want to model a car. And then shape expressions will say, well, you need to have these things. And it's a definition or language that defines that. And then finally, there's another tool, yet another tool that you would never find unless someone told you about it, called Cradle. And Cradle is a pretty neat kind of forms-oriented way of creating Wikidata items. So this might be useful for the user. We don't have the name for, but you know, the question was, when creating a Wikidata item, is there a pattern to follow? And Cradle is that pattern, right? So you can actually go in here and say, someone has defined what an actor should be. You click on actor, and it's like a forms-based way of creating a Wikidata item. You can put in the labels, as Jan said. We want labels. There's even a red asterisk there that shows you, you know, we need this. Sex or gender, we need this. And then everything else is kind of optional as you add it. So this is kind of nice in that you don't even need to ask someone to make that. Anyone can make that. So look at this. This is pretty cool. Oops, sorry, wrong page here. You can go to this configuration page, believe it or not, and you can just type in the definition of what you want in that Cradle entry. That's pretty cool, right? So you edit this wiki page, you tell it what structure you want for that item, and then when you bring it into the Cradle tool, it'll read this definition from the wiki page and make the form for you. And then when you hit the submit button, when you fill out the form, it'll create a Wikidata item with those things.
Yeah,
so
it can be very useful if you have a number of things that you want to create at once, but still not that many that you want to run a bot. So I had something
right.
like 20 podcast episodes I would like to add. So I created a Cradle for podcast episodes, and then I could just easily, with this form, fill those in and be done with it.
Right. So this is the Cradle tool. Sorry, my font's a little bit screwed up there. Wikidata : Cradle. And again, you know, notice how many different places there's this tool. There's the Recoin thing, which is over here. Shape expressions is this new thing. You would be forgiven completely if you didn't know these things existed, because it's only after struggling and looking and being in the community for a while you get to know where these are. So we're trying to do better at documenting these things. If you are interested in more Wikidata stuff, I'll do a little bit of self-promotion, but we may try to make this one-page guide to Wikidata to show you where all these tools are. So if you click on the one-page guide, it tries to tell you about the most common tools you should be trying out. So this is called the Wikidata in Brief Guide. And if you just go to WD:1, right here, up there, then you'll get to this page. It's been translated into 10 plus languages, which is hopefully useful.
It's an awesome tool. I saw it being handed out on Open Belgium, the conference, just before the Corona shutdown. And people were using it, and it was really good. You got one piece of feedback, though. There's no link to the Wikidata on it.
There's no link to Wikidata. I guess that would be useful, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got some room there that says wikidata.org.
Yes. Good.
That makes complete sense. Okay, I will make that edit. That's a good point. Usually it's the most obvious stuff that you forget. Okay, excellent.
And if you're more interested in Wikidata, me and user Abbe98 will actually do live stream editing Wikidata tomorrow evening.
Oh, nice. Excellent. Yeah, more Wikidata. You learn a lot from watching other people do it. Go ahead.
My biggest advice for Wikidata is, I mean, there are a lot of these custom tools and forms, but what I always find most useful is the same set that you use on Wikipedia, which is copied from other articles. So if you look around, like say if you want to look at a painting, this is a, you can look at this is a painting that I sometimes that I worked on, and I sometimes look at it when I want to make another painting. Just look at all the properties that they use, what types of things they have. You can see sort of the conventions, like a human is always an instance of a human. This is like had to be decided at a certain point in time. A human is not someone defined by gender. It's not defined by occupation or by nationality. It's not an instance of American. It's an instance of a human. And just we decide that, and we decide that paintings are instances of paintings, and you have to look. There's some understanding of the format, and there are different obviously standards created and semi-enforced by the wiki projects, but very laxly. Mostly they're enforced when people mass import, and they decide which style to mass import them, or they decide to mass change them later, and hopefully they don't change it back and forth too much.
Yeah, that was the best tip of today, I guess. Look at what others are doing, because it's how you learn as well, going from topic to topic on Wikidata. Because since, as you said, Andrew, there's no model, but of course there are conventions on ad hoc conventions. So you have to go around and see. And sometimes you go into a topic like, oh, no one did this before. I will have to figure it out.
Right.
But in a lot of topics, it is already figured out, and there's a lot to learn of the items that are already there.
Yeah, and the comment here is, I love Wikidata. I find it be easier than writing an article. That is absolutely right. And I think, we were at a conference one time demoing Wikidata. This is like 3+ years ago, so it's still fairly new. And it was to a room full of librarians, and I think Rebecca will appreciate this. And we're talking about Wikidata and saying, oh, you can do this and this and this. And I told everyone with a mobile phone, like, okay, go in and try to change a statement about your institution, because these are all archivists and librarians and from national libraries, not national, but like state libraries. And they went to change it. And just spontaneously, one of the people yelled out saying, wow, this is so much easier than editing Wikipedia. And I said, yeah. And that's one reason why a lot of our editathons now are kind of based around Wikidata first, providing the bones around the content or the item, and then you can fill it out with the article around it, right? So Richard even has a whole tool based around this concept that if you fill in the Wikidata stuff, he's helped make a tool called mbabble that'll take the Wikidata content and just make a skeleton article. Because, you think about it, when you start an article, about 80% of the content's exactly the same, right? It's like, Richard Nipel is a American, Wikipedian who lives in blah, blah, blah. And then it has some basic templated code or content underneath. So that's something that's really useful, is to have a tool that does that. Yeah, so there it is. Oops, sorry. There's mbabble on the screen. And it's a tool that the Portuguese speakers in Brazil use a lot now, right, Richard?
We developed it first for the for artworks, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but it's been developed by the Portuguese speaking community in Brazil for all sorts of items, and particularly in the most elaborate way for Brazilian state elections. So they have a whole system where they interpret in the Wikidata about the Brazilian state election. It generates a whole article based on this vote from this area, this vote for that candidate, and then of course it leaves space where humans have to actually write in and interpret the election and give it sort of a narrative, which is we don't want purely machine generated articles, because that would not be in wiki style. And so hopefully this tool is trying to find a little bit of a balance between the two.
Yeah, it's like more Android. It's not robotic. It's not totally human. It's a cyborg approach. So let's check in back with Rebecca here. Yeah. You are adding references, which are beautiful.
Trying to. I've definitely fallen down the rabbit hole of a Google search, and I cannot get out. There is shockingly little about it. I have my one book, which is one of my go-to books, which is 300 Years of Irish Watercolours and Drawings. I own a selection of really obscure art history books now on the back of writing about an awful lot of these women. I own a series of books exclusively on Irish botanical artists because of this. So she only gets a paragraph in that book, so didn't really add a huge amount to it, unfortunately. Yeah, there's very little of her work online. We were talking about lack of imagery. And it appears because most of her collection is still in the family home, which sold for apparently 200 million, or was attempted to be sold for 200 million euro in 2005. So all of the artwork is probably, still deemed as being in private hands. So that's why there's relatively little of it in the ecosphere, unfortunately. It's quite sad for her work. But it's still, I suppose it's nice in one way that the collection is still all together, but it doesn't help us, unfortunately.
I could only find a few. I mean, I Googled probably with a little bit of specificity than you. I only found a few paintings that had been sold, recently, and there's very little details about them.
Yeah.
None of them are on Wikidata. So if anyone wants to, I'm not sure which paintings are the most important ones, but it'd be nice to have one or two on Wikidata.
Because she didn't paint, as far as I can tell, she didn't paint as to earn her money. She appears to have been kind of independently. The family were wealthy, so she didn't have to sell or anything like that. So it does appear to have been. She may or may not have gone to art school. It's not confirmed. So I suppose she's not an amateur, but she's not a working artist, as it were. So she did it for pleasure. So while she is deemed, she has had retrospective exhibitions done about her, she didn't have to get her work out into the world, as it were. So it's interesting how you can find how people, how their careers progressed, affected how much you see of their collections. And it's really interesting from an Irish perspective. I quite often find that Irish institutions are in general more hesitant to release their images under an open license. So when I do get to illustrate an artist's page, it's generally from a continental or American or Australian institution that's opened up their collections, not from an Irish collection per se.
Now, in the process of looking up more information about her, I found her in the National Irish Visual Arts Library, which is probably familiar to you, right, Rebecca?
Yeah, Nival, so I just added that in, actually. So that's held by NCAD, which is the National College of Art and Design in Ireland. And it is in the process. I spoke to them, and I was quite hopeful that they might start kind of drip feeding things out, because they hold quite a lot of quite important collections about women artists in particular. It's a really good resource. They had done a huge digitization drive last year, and they were kind of on the ramp up to reopen. And of course, now that's all gone by the wayside for the moment.
Yeah, but I just noticed that they're not in Wikidata as a authority control or a identifier.
Oh, they probably should be, because I think they have individual identifiers.
Yeah, that's right. It's a pretty clean URL. If we put it in here, let me see if I can put it in the banner here. This is what the URL looks like for Beatrice. And it's pretty good. I mean, it's, so you can just basically use the last part of that as the identifier, hopefully. And that might be worth making a property proposal for that, for Wikidata.
It's quite interesting how it's made up, because it suggests that you can also have other things. So before we make a property proposal, we should figure out what else could we also link to. Like, can we link directly to paintings as well?
Yeah, that would be cool. But it does seem like it would be a good candidate with some research, because there's a lot of great things here in this database.
They're an authority for sure. So yes, a property. We just need to figure out how to make the proposal, and then it will be passed quite quickly.
Yeah, and for folks who don't know, the funny thing about Wikidata, or not funny, but the interesting thing about Wikidata is that if you look at the queue numbers or the items, anyone can make it. It's just something that you can go in now and just throw in there. You can say create new item here, and let's make a new item about a new person or something. Oops, let me not cover up Jan's face there. And you can make it right away. Anyone's available to do this. Now, the thing is, if you want the properties, it's like gender and instance of all that stuff. That's very tightly controlled, right? The P numbers. So unfortunately, finding those P numbers or looking through them is not always the easiest thing to do. So there is a tool called Prop Browse, which I use. I don't know if you folks use this or what other hints you have.
I think I need to learn this as well, because this is the hardest part of Wikidata since it's grown. Like when they were less than 1,000, it was easier to browse, but now even the pages that have them listed are they're so long. There's so much things to find.
Yeah, so this is like at my fingertips every single day when I work with Wikidata. It's like, what is that property? And, it's nice because it's interactive, right? So you could say virtual and find out all the matches to virtual. But unfortunately, there's lots of matches sometimes. This is what I am looking for most of the time. VIAF, which is the most popular probably book identifier out there. So this is my go-to tool, but I don't know whether it's multilingual friendly necessarily. Anyway, it's what I use. So if we're going to go ahead, sorry.
So start writing SVE and see if we get some Swedish properties.
Yeah, I do here, right? Or
yes. All right.
Swedish football. So maybe it is like being inclusive and looking at all different, different kinds of
that's nice.
labels for that. So I use this most of the time. But what we were talking about before is if you look at the identifiers for someone, we're looking at Obama and all those identifiers. If you want to propose a new one, it's a little bit more complex, right? You have to go, I believe it's Community Portal, and then you go down to Property Proposal right here. And then you need to, make a proposal there. I use this overview chart here just to kind of see where the discussions are, which is kind of an interesting way of listing active proposals, right? So this is how many days it's been open or how many days it's last been edited. You've got this weird thing where you've got some that are really open for a long time and we haven't figured out what to do. So they're still like in limbo.
There's also dependencies. So some of them are waiting for technical improvements of the actual software before we actually can do them. Like some of the very old are like that because someone figured out we need this, but the software cannot do it yet. Right.
So
there's also one natural thing with the complexity with the property because it more or less, when you add it, it needs to be done, whereas a Wikidata item can be more or less empty when you create it.
Right.
It wouldn't make sense to have an empty property.
Correct. That's right. So let's take a look at one maybe in the works here that might be interesting. Probably one that's similar would be an identifier, right? An ID. Let's take a look at this one. So you can see that for a property proposal, you need to kind of, as John said, you have to research it, you have to think it out, you have to know what the regular expression or the pattern of the identifier looks like. Is it numbers? Is it a mix? Is it always 6 digits long? You have to kind of know all that stuff. And then we actually have a little mini vote, hopefully as a consensus on whether something is supported or not. What would you say? Like 90% of them are pretty uncontroversial. The other 10% are the tough part.
Yes, and mostly, especially for external IDs, I guess the discussions are around: are we adding the right link, and are we adding it like as with the correct data type, like an external identifier? Because sometimes it makes sense to use URL instead, and sometimes it makes not. So that's a little bit of the tricky part when proposing it. Right.
Yeah, and sometimes the entity on the other side, has several ways to get to the resource, right? Sometimes it's through some kind of weird query string. Sometimes it's a really well formatted, what we call like a REST API friendly string. Now we're getting to the weeds, but this is what we do. It's kind of weird.
And whatever we want it to be a persistent URL, so it won't change in a week or two, or even a year or two, or 10.
Exactly. So this is your work list, right, Rebecca, or what you're working on now?
Yeah, so we were talking about it. I found it really interesting that you were talking about kind of finding things for new editors to do. And I mentioned that I go around plucking out. So rather than setting myself the task of de-stubbing or expanding loads of articles, I tend to just collect them. So always women are always on top. Then everybody else is lesser. So we have Irish people are just men. Well, actually, no, there's 2 women I've snuck in there. I have various associations with kind of STEM aligned groups in Ireland. One of which is I sit on the National Committee for Commemorative Plaques for Science and Technology. So an awful lot of these people are either candidates being have received these plaques, so they're kind of seen as being nationally or internationally important, or they are being considered for one, so they're kind of note within the UK and Ireland. And then I just kind of have general kind of interests. Men always fall down the bottom of my lists persistently, but I suppose the more interesting list maybe is I did the 100 Wiki days. I don't know if anybody
heard about it. I'm on a 52 Wikidata weeks right now.
Oh, wow. Wow. So it's Vasia from Bulgaria who came up with this. And I was the first Irish, or not Irish, I was the first English language victim. Actually, I was the first person to do it on English language Wikipedia.
Wow.
Back in 2015. So my list from 2015 is all the way down here. So it was a mixture of places in Ireland, people. I wrote articles for nearly all of the county museums in Ireland, but my to-do list, which is what people might find a little bit interesting, all of these red people here.
Wow.
So I realized that I had well over 366 red links. So I was like, right, okay, that's a year. So I've set myself the challenge of a year. So I'm writing an article every year or every day for this year. An awful lot of these women are from the Dictionary of Irish Biography. So they have, so I kind of cross-referenced as they would publish new articles on their online forum or their online database. I would check whether or not they exist on Wikipedia. Now, sometimes I do miss them because sometimes the naming conventions don't match up. So I have on occasion created an article that had to be merged then with one that already existed. And some of them, because there have been some uploads from the DIB into Wikidata, some of them have Wikidata items, so they do turn up on the Women in Red lists as well. And as I said, there's an awful lot of nuns, in there, snaking in. An awful lot of nuns that we sent to the States and Australia and New Zealand. Sorry about that. Apologise. And some of them kind of betray my interests. So I used to work in the National Museum of Ireland, so there's kind of a gap in the history there. But the one that I wrote yesterday that I would encourage people to read outside of the Wikipedia article is this woman here. She was absolutely notorious, supposedly married somewhere between 12 and 25 men, and murdered most of them, supposedly. She's a bit of a badass. It turns out she was probably only married 3 times. And it doesn't look like she offed any of them. Maybe the last one, we don't know. So the castle that she's associated with in the Burren in Ireland is known as Limnay Castle, and I used to be big into ghost stories when I was a teenager, and I knew her from these, that she was kind of notorious for having kind of done horrible things to people, tortured them and things like that, and she supposedly haunts either the castle or the environs alongside a lot of her victims, so she's quite a cool. And it's what's nice about using the Dictionary of Irish Biography is that you bounce around in time an awful lot. So this woman is, the 1600s, but equally I can write about somebody like Beatrice, who was, less than 100 years ago. So right. There's quite nice breadth there. So I don't tend to stick to a particular period of time. I kind of bounce around the place a little bit. But we'll go back to Beatrice maybe.
I noticed that in her article, there's something, is this intentional or not? If we go down to the bottom, I'll show you what I saw on her article. If you scroll down to the last section of her article, maybe.
Yeah.
Death and subsequent legends, there's some strike-throughs at the bottom.
Yes. That's from, there was an editor attempting to make changes earlier, a new editor, and
oh, okay.
That's probably from reversions that didn't quite go through.
Okay. I thought there was some interesting editorial there. So
there is, because all of the things, nearly everything that's about her is kind of legend. This thing that supposedly she died, she was strung up by her hair. She was hung by her hair until she died. Some variations of this, I couldn't find any citations for it, was that it was a riding accident, that she was riding past a tree and her hood got caught up, and that's what kind of, I suppose, garroted her. The one that I particularly love is that she was sealed into a tree. I think that one is particularly gruesome. She was sealed into a hollow tree, and that's how she died, because she was so terrible. That's the only thing that they could do to her. What's really interesting is that there's a little bit about it further up, is that an awful lot of things that are said about her are kind of warrior queen myths from Ireland. So stories that would have been told about kind of notorious women over time have been kind of overlaid onto her story. So I came across an interesting one that was kind of similar not too long ago, a woman that was referred to as the Helen of Troy of Ireland. So she was kind of, seen as held hostage and uniting people and splitting them apart and that kind of thing. So those kind of motifs are quite interesting to stumble upon.
Right.
Take out that strike through.
Oh, do we see a save here?
What's that? Do we see a
save?
I actually saved the page.
Nice.
I'm trying to think who the other woman was now. I mean, it's interesting, but also really challenging to write about women from that era, because generally, especially in Ireland, they wouldn't have been literate, so there's nothing from them. Anything that is recorded about them tends to be in relation to men, so not kind of independent. This was the woman, Mabel Bagnall. She's referred to as the Helen of the Elizabethan Wars. So there's quite a famous part of Irish history where you had the flight of the earls, and it's when some of the old noblemen of Ireland flee Ireland when Queen Elizabeth I is planting. So she's removing native Irish people from the land and planting English settlers. And these nobles had kind of fought her, and eventually they're kind of quashed. And O'Neill, but I don't know if I'm related to him, probably not. He's one of the girls that takes flight. And she's kind of caught up in a lot of this. She marries Hugh O'Neill, who's the Earl of Tyrone. And she's a little bit of a bargaining chip at times. So we don't know, I mean, the sources that I have kind of say things like, we don't know how she felt about this, kind of as she's kind of shuffled around and hidden from people and presented to other people. So it's both interesting and frustrating at the same time, I suppose is what I'm saying.
Yeah, interesting. The number of unsourced statements here is kind of interesting. So, well, actually, there's only two references for the O'Brien article. Well, actually, 3. So
it's finding good quality, because there's an awful lot of, say, blog posts and that kind of material, and it's kind of self-published ghost story type books,
right.
Local historians. There's lots of that material, but that's going to be mostly the less rigorous sources.
But do you feel like sometimes writing it just purely based on what is provable and verifiable, you're kind of like a killjoy in many ways? It's like these books about these gigantic legends, like, no, not really. It's kind of like this.
I suppose in some ways I feel like I've done the boring bit. So that leaves space for people to add some sources have claimed that, or a legend tells, so I suppose I've done the really kind of backbone of it to say these are the things we definitely know, right. And then people can add, because I do wonder, is it just being a Wikipedian has broken me slightly, in that once you stray into that territory, I get uncomfortable. I'm like, oh no, I can't add that. That's not allowed.
You know what? I never put that one and one together before, but there may be a reason why I've told my kids there is no tooth fairy. You're not getting any money. No Santa. None of those things. And I'm like brutal. I'm brutally like, it's not provable. It's not verifiable. Why would I tell you a lie? So. And Paul's my friends. They're like, no tooth fairy. You got to give them money. I'm like, no, they're not doing that. So I never attributed it to my Wikipedianness, but I think you've just lit a light bulb. Like, I think it is completely that. So
I think it does break you slightly. Like,
yeah.
I was involved in the skeptic movement for a long time. So kind of like the James Randi,
right.
kind of extraordinary examination of extraordinary claims. And you do find that, those conversation goes in that direction, like, and somebody makes an unverified statement, the rest of the room like turns to you kind of going, well, Come on. What's your response?
Right.
Over to you. And you're like, well, I'm not going to be I don't want to be the...
You're the yeah but person.
Yeah. It's like, well, actually. But then mansplainers have taken that, so I can't use that anymore.
Another
Right.
thing that mansplainers have taken from us.
Oh, man.
You're a hipster mansplainer.
Yes.
So we'll probably go on for another 5 or 10 minutes here, but I just want to ask you, of all those articles you're working on for the 100 Wiki Days, or 365 Wiki Days, really? That's what you're doing, right?
366. We're in a leap year.
366. Wow. Bonus record. This is a unique year that you can do more than anyone else. So it's too late to start. So how much pushback do you see in terms of being put up for deletion?
Oh, I feel like I'm gonna put a jinx on myself now.
None so far?
None so far. So far being the primary. There are a few that I'm like, oh, this is very much on the border. I mean, I've been I suppose, unpatrolled for quite some time. And because I've done 2 rounds of this, largely most of the articles that I publish, because they're quite niche, they get really very little footfall from that point of view. Primarily, the edits that are made to them are usually my terrible grammar and syntax. And repeating of pronouns and things like that as I'm kind of shuffling between sources. So up until now, so far so good. But that said, now probably somebody's going to go and tag them all just to teach me a lesson.
Well, there are certain benefits of not editing in the major highways of Wikipedia and more on the dirt roads of Wikipedia. So that's part of it as well, I'm sure.
I'm definitely in the quiet backwaters of Wikipedia. I'm telling you, those Irish nuns are not headline. But it's interesting, the people who will notice, they might not necessarily edit. So I wrote about, it was an Australian, so she's an Irish woman, went to Australia and was involved in the foundation of a particular order of nuns in Australia. And somebody obviously had them on their list and went to my talk page and thanked me for creating it. So she had a Wiki Data item. She was in the Australian National Biography. So she was obviously kind of note, obviously from their point of view as well. So it's nice that people do notice when, because when you're writing fairly niche articles, you're like, well, who is actually looking at these and, of how much use are they?
Right.
But it can be quite surprising the people that do notice the work that you're doing, which is nice.
Right. Yeah, it's just a great work that all of you folks are doing with the Women in Red. I mean, it's now a statistic we can repeat almost from memory, the bump from like 15% to 18%. And you think like, well, it's what, 3 percentage points, but think of how many millions of articles we have. That's a big blip in the curve, right? So that's great work that you folks are doing. And yeah, hats off to you for doing that 366 days in a row without much pushback yet. So
I do for every 19 women I write about one man, because it's at 18%. So I'm like, okay, I'll allow one man in for every 18 women. So and I there's kind of it's interesting that you can fall down these niches. I have no particular interest in, say, religious history, and I end up writing about these people. Also, as an Irish person, I end up writing an awful lot about, say, Northern Irish Unionists, who would be, I suppose, politically on a very different plane to me, or would have been historically. And what's nice about Wikipedia editing is that sometimes you can do that in a way that doesn't feel like, there was one particular woman, now she's going back quite some time. She was what's referred to as a Fenian. So that's kind of going back in Irish independence quite some time. And she ends over in America and is pro-slavery. And I didn't realize that when I started writing the article.
Oh, yeah.
And you're like, oh. But I suppose in the way that you can kind of, not that you're justifying it, but that you can place it, I'm not saying that she's good by writing this article. I'm just saying that she was a historical figure during this time. I'm not saying that she was right for what she did. But that doesn't negate her place within the history of these things. So it's you can place yourself kind of, it can be seen as quite patriotic to only write about, say, things related to the country that you're from, but sometimes actually the action is the opposite, in that you're highlighting some of the things that aren't. And with Irish history, I think that's really an important thing to do, because we're seen as quite quite a kind of benign force an awful lot of the time. Everybody loves the Irish. But we weren't always the most benign. We were involved in wars. We had mercenaries, with people, on both sides of the American Civil War, both sides of both world wars, that it's not always as nice and fluffy and to be sure, and top of the morning to you and all that kind of stuff. So there is a role for that as well,
Right. One last thing that I want to ask you about that I still can't wrap my head around, but it makes complete sense, is the study that was done recently about who reads Wikipedia. And you kind of think that, okay, we have this problem that there's not that many bios about women in Wikipedia. Then they came out with the stats saying that the readership of Wikipedia is actually really unbalanced towards men. It's like a lot more men read Wikipedia than women. And then that's kind of like a punch in the gut. It's kind of like, well, then of course we're going to have an imbalance of content about women, because we don't even start from a place where there's a pool of 50-50, in terms of men and women editors. It's more like, 80, I think it's like 75-25 or something like that. But it's still significant imbalance, even just in readers. What is your reaction to that what I thought was a really surprising result?
I do wonder, does a certain amount of it go back to the ways in which people are taught how to access information? And I suppose the differences in how people might go looking for information as well. Like, we are seeing, the mantra of the Wikimedia movement for a long time when it came to education was that, well, your students are going there anyway, but we're actually finding they're not as much anymore. They're going to video sources. Right. And that really the written word isn't as popular as it was. And I wonder, I'm not saying that kind of information retrieval is heavily gendered, but I wonder, is there an element to that there is, as the experience of a woman kind of going to the so-called traditional informational sources, you are somewhat primed to know that they are written by a particular set of people for a particular set of people. And right. that those are probably not similar to you. So there may be an element of women selecting their information sources based on the kind of information that they're looking, and kind of doing it, they're not doing it consciously, if you know what I mean.
There's a comment from someone saying, I admire you, Rebecca. I am trying to do one article a day, but just at the moment because we're under quarantine. I mean, there's no better time to do an article a day than now.
I'm telling you. It's definitely shows socially distanced. There's no two ways about it.
Yes.
I am developing quite a long list of books that I need to get out of either libraries or bookshops. So that's the only thing. Not everything is online, it turns out. Right.
And well, thank you so much for joining us on this, and I hope we can do it again. We are, as you said, we are all at home trying to connect and keep connections live, and we're not going to have any face-to-face meetings for the foreseeable future. And, we're already a virtual community, and teaching each other what we do through podcasts like this, I think can further a lot of the community goals that we have, because we're all trying to figure out now how to teach remotely like this, which is really a new challenge. As you said, you don't have that, kind of dynamic clustering in a real life event. You got to find some ways to replicate some of that. Right? Yeah. So, Jan, any last words or any final words of advice for folks? How to do the training and how to deal with the distance?
No, just get out there and do stuff, I think. And Richard had the best tip. Look at what others are doing and copying the good parts of that. I think that's most of the basic trainings of most Wikipedians, because the general helps, and like it's so much to read, so it's easy just to look and learn and copy.
Mm-hmm. Richard, any hints from your many years of training?
I guess I'd leave you with.
Oh, I can't hear Richard for some reason. Can you?
I can hear him.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there was an American folk singer who said, "He stole that from me, but I steal from everybody," and that's what I think Wikipedia, how it works. So, leave you that piece of wisdom from Woody Guthrie.
All right. Good.
Great. Well, thanks again. And we're going to do more of these experiments of editing with folks from different parts of the community. And we hope you enjoyed it. And we're going to try to do them in different ways. In fact, hopefully later today, we'll have another one as well with folks who are doing amazing work with Wikidata mapping and photos of archaeological sites. So thanks again. And thank you, Rebecca. And we'll come back to you soon and check in on your progress of 366 Wiki days.
I'm a 93, so, you know, we'll come up with a marker that we can dive in on. Great.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. And find us on Facebook. If you're a Facebook user, we have a group called Wikipedia Weekly there. It's on the screen. Twitter.com/Wikipedia Weekly. We also have a YouTube channel where we have these archived. And if you're a Twitch user, we actually stream it on Twitch as well. And get in touch with Jan, myself, or Richard. Go to the Meta site, and hopefully we can bring that up here. We have a page where you can express your interest in getting involved with what we're doing here. At that page there, read more at Wikipedia Weekly Network. We're also looking for more people to join the conversation. So with that, thanks for joining us, and we'll play the outro if we can. Let's see.